Somewhere I have a Dennis the Menace cartoon that Isabel Hiltbrunner gave me probably 20 years ago. And as I open my Bible and things start to fall out of it, I'm reminded of that cartoon. Dennis is opening the Bible and he's, "Oh, a piece of bacon. Look what I found in my Bible." You just never know. Never know what's going to be in there. It's an interesting title, I think. Healings that fail. And by that I mean healings that have occurred and then seem to go away, to dissipate. I read a statistic that said about 50%, maybe even a little more than 50%, of cured illnesses by faith or prayer or right thinking have failed and don't stay cured. They have, after more or less time, lapsed back into the previous condition, the previous disease, the previous state. And makes us wonder, why? Why? I know that what God does completely, right? God doesn't do by halves. Charles Fillmore said, what's been done once can be done again. Jesus healed. He taught the disciples to heal. He taught that principle of healing that if he could teach the disciples to do it, must mean that that principle is universal, don't you think? That we all can. The fact that healings happen and then they seem to go away doesn't discredit truth at all. I think it's a great reminder that the law of healing works, but then it is we who work it. A pretty smart guy once said, God can't do anything for you that he can't do through you. God works through us. So we are partners in this process of healing. I've looked at this over a number of years, and I've seen them happen. I've had them happen to me, had the experience. And healing is a change of state of any condition. If you are in a condition of lack and you all of a sudden, through your spiritual work, through affirmation, through classwork, study, come into a consciousness of supply, it all is wonderful. And then sometimes that goes away. I remember, being in a pretty good state of consciousness, and I got a new job teaching junior high school in northern Kentucky. It was a hard job. It was a very difficult job. My office, I didn't have one. My desk, I didn't have one. But the janitor had a desk in the boiler room that he let me use. I was teaching general music, not my favorite subject. And of course, it was not the students' favorite subject either. And they would fill up the art classes and they'd fill up the shop classes. And when those were full, the people who wanted to take art or shop were placed in my class. And I had a class as large as 83 students. And in the morning, I taught in the cafeteria. So by the time I was doing my last morning class, the last half of my last morning class, they were serving lunch already. So people were coming in and food smells. You can imagine how interested my students were in lunch. And then in the afternoon, they put me in the band room because the band director went to a different school. So then I had the 83 that went from here to here. And that was pretty exciting. One day I had one guy just having a great time with the girls that were sitting around him. And as I spoke to that, I had another student who had epilepsy go into a seizure over here. And oh my, the days were interesting. I ended up with laryngitis. And I ended up with it for, I don't know, I guess about 3 weeks. And I thought, what happened? And then I realized what happened. My thinking had gone, may I say, into that porcelain circular thing. So I found myself then carrying to school a copy of our favorite, Lessons in Truth. And I sat in my free time in that boiler room at the janitor's desk, reading Lessons in Truth and thinking Emily Cady's thoughts after her. And my life improved again. Things were great. They went down. They got better. All in the change in consciousness. So I looked at how some of these seem to occur. You walk into a truth class. Maybe it's the first truth class you've ever had ever. You've come because you're seeking something, because there's some challenge or difficulty in your life. Myrtle went to a lecture by E.B. Weeks in 1886. That's where she came home with a new thought. Charles apparently didn't get it, but she did. And she began to work with that. So a new student comes into truth, had never experienced truth before, perhaps, and gets this new concept, new way of thinking, and begins to work it. Because, you got a new convert, they're converted, right? They're convinced, you got to do this. And they start to do it. And they start to do it, may I say, religiously. And they buy every book that they can lay their hands on. And whatever it is in their life changes. Well, you know what we tend to do when things get better? Everything's fine. I know I used to go to Sunday services every week, and I went to the midweek service every week, and I think I'll skip midweek this week. Sunday, I think maybe I'll go fishing. Things are so good. And what happens over a period of time? The thinking starts to revert. And there are plenty of people in the world who will tell you that affirmative thought and those divine ideas you've been talking about, well, that's just foolishness. You gotta face the facts. Oh yeah? That's what made me sick. It was not facing the facts that made us well. Remember, facts are the observable outer characteristics. And often the outer stuff changes, does it not? So we did everything right, and then little by little, because things were working so well, we start to slide a little bit. Now, if you said to me, Greg, you're backsliding, I would have denied it completely. Absolutely. Because we just misremember. We don't notice the little changes. Remember the story of the frog in the pot of cold water on the stove? He's perfectly comfortable in the cold water, right? Gets a little warmer. He's comfortable. A little warmer. A little warmer. And eventually you have frog soup. And a contented frog. We don't notice the little changes until all of a sudden it's intolerable or uncomfortable or painful. Now, did God change his attitude towards this truth student who did all the stuff right, got well, and then started to slide back to his old behavior? Did God change his attitude? No. The truth student changed his attitude toward God. Now, when Jesus did all these healings, remember, his secret was identifying with the Father all the time. He had a constant consciousness of the presence, not the absence of God. That is the point of power, staying connected, one with the source of life, health, love, peace, prosperity. We forget. And all of a sudden, we find we're more aware of the absence, or find ourselves thinking about other things than the presence of God. Distracted by stuff out here. And the distractive thought takes us back to where we were. There's a story in the Gospels that I like because it sort of points to this kind of situation. There was a father who had a son. It depends on which gospel you find this story in the 9th chapter of Mark. You also find it in Matthew, and it's also in Luke. In Matthew, he's an epileptic. In Mark, he has a dumb spirit. I kind of like the dumb spirit part, because I know what that is. Now, the father took the boy to the disciples. Jesus had taught them how to do this stuff. He expected them to have the same consciousness of the presence of God that he had. And the healing didn't work. So the dad comes to Jesus, as one of those good come to Jesus talks. And what he says to Jesus, I think ruffled Jesus' feathers. He tells him that the disciples couldn't heal this. And he said, so if you can, and Jesus says, if you can, the father believes, but not very much. Not really sure. So he has kind of a double mind. Oh, this will work. Well, maybe it won't. This, yeah, maybe not. Been there? You may be going there. He tells the disciples, you can only handle this by prayer and fasting. What does that mean to us? Prayer, contemplation of the very presence of God. Being open to divine ideas. Being open to that sense of God is here. God is here now. God is the healing presence that heals me now. Fasting. Well, from what? Oh. I just dropped my cozy. Material thoughts, yes. When they were asked to heal the boy and they couldn't do it, the disciples allowed themselves to be dragged into arguments with the scribes about whether such a case could be healed or not. Distraction. Pulled away from the main event. Pulled away from the realization that God is the healing power and God is at work in this situation. What does it mean for us? When healing happens, it happens because we reached a state where we were aware of the presence of God. God is life. God is love. God is health. And God is wholeness. And that God does heal through us. We let go of the limited ideas that kept us stuck and became open and receptive to that healing energy of God. But if we begin to get distracted, which is easy to do, folks, do I have to tell you that? No. We're all like a bunch of kids that, where's the newest shiny thing? Looking at stuff in the outer world. That's why I like the description in Mark where he says, dumb spirit. We get a dumb spirit. We get all caught up in the consciousness of outside, how things look. Oh, what's happening out here? Appearances, thoughts about material things, concerns about day to day, as opposed to concerns about eternity. The eternal presence of God within. That's a dumb spirit. That dumb spirit will lead you astray every time. Prayer and fasting. Prayer connecting so that you realize and stay in tune with the presence of God with you and within you. And fasting from all the distractions, all the things that pull you away from that consciousness. I remember back in school at Unity, when I worked in the retreat department, there was somebody in the retreat department. We would go out to dinner after we'd do a program. And sometimes we'd get to talking about things that probably were better left not done. You know, talking about, I don't know, do you ever talk about people? About situations in a negative light. And I remember one time he said, man, can you feel it? What? Consciousness just dropping. And you could. It was palpable. You could feel it. If you'll be aware of that in your life, you catch yourself doing this stuff, you can feel that inner spirit kind of going, it gets heavier, and it's your whole consciousness seems to get mired in mud. That will take you back to where you were before a healing took place. God can only do for us what God can do through us, and it's for us to be that conductor, that open wire that will accept that energy and channel that energy. So that every cell is spiritualized. I love that word. And, I love this one better, electrified. Thank you. Thank you, May Rowland. Every cell spiritualized and electrified. But not just saying it, but seeing it, feeling it, and then knowing it. You shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. But to know it means you use it. Doesn't mean to look at it today and forget it tomorrow. Remember, Charles said the truth you use is the truth you know. All else is theory. When we stop using it, we put it back on the shelf as a theory. Oh, that might be fun someday to try out. Or I tried that, and it worked, so we'll set that aside. Get it? You get into the consciousness. You open your mind and your heart to receive the healing, and it happens. Why does it happen? Because there's a healing law, a principle, and it works as exactly as mathematics. And it means that every time we work it, it works. But as we disconnect, pull away from the power, feel our consciousness coming down because we've been distracted by other things. What happened? Let God do through you what God seeks to do for you. God is the God of life. God knows no opposite than life. Health. God knows no opposite than health, right? Can you imagine the size of the aspirin God would have to take? Of course not, because it's absurd. And yet here we are, created in the image, after the likeness of God. And we forget health is our birthright. Created whole, well, and free. But it's up to us. So watch out for that dumb spirit. It sure sneaks up. It's really easy to slide and not realize you're doing it.